Hello, and welcome. We'll have a conversation about a topic that's a bit different, but no less philosophical. Do you know what we're going to talk about? About The Lion King. Yes, that one, the animated film, which has now been turned into a live-action movie. It's one of the many films being released by Disney in this format, and this version has everything it needs to be just as successful as the original animation. You might know that the original script of the film, released in 1988, was one of Disney's most elaborate and complex productions, and also one of its highest grossing. If you take a look, most of Disney's major animated films are based on earlier tales or stories. But The Lion King is not. The Lion King is a completely original script, created entirely by Disney's screenwriters. It went through numerous transformations before becoming consistent. It involved tremendous work from professionals animators, screenwriters, voice actors, and the soundtrack team. It's said that just one of the scenes, the stampede of the nose, took 4 years to complete. And beyond all that, there was still skepticism, because the story didn't seem original and few people believed in it. In addition, it was being produced in parallel with Pocahontas, which was a story that seemed much more solid and well structured. Well, the environment in which it was conceived and imagined. The Lion King was Kenya's national park. There, they envisioned it as the lands of the kingdom, the savannah where the young Lion King would reign. And from that, a simple yet deeply compelling storyline was created. We'll see that this was the main reason the film had such a powerful impact, not just the technical perfection. Not just the beauty of certain scenes, like the Circle of Life, which you encounter right at the beginning. The entire film is filled with stunning visuals, but it's the strength and coherence of the storyline that truly stands out. The story is, on the surface, a simple one: a young lion who flees his homeland, believing he is responsible for his father's death deceived by his uncle, and who, after some time, is persuaded to return, to drive out his uncle's offspring and remove his uncle from the throne he had usurped, to reclaim his rightful place as king. Basically, a simple plot, quite simple, but behind this seemingly straightforward tale of overthrowing a usurper and reclaiming the throne to become a just and noble king. There lies an entire set of inspirations that you're probably already beginning to sense in the air. The storyline strongly echoes Greek theater, without a doubt the drama, and even the essence of Greek tragedy. We also find inspiration in two biblical stories, the story of Joseph and the story of Moses. There was inspiration from the great Shakespearean drama, Hamlet, which is undoubtedly the most similar. In short, a richly woven tapestry of references. Even the classic Bambi contains some important references we'll see. So, notice something interesting. What similarities can we observe in the story of Joseph, who was sold by his brothers into Egypt? It's the story of a son who is abandoned, separated from his father, and who seeks to reclaim his rightful place through merit. We have Moses. Once again, we see the child who, due to tragic circumstances, is separated from his family at a very young age and is destined to reclaim his place and become the one who leads the people of Israel. In other words, the child was destined for greatness despite an unfortunate fate in childhood. In Hamlet, we see a great deal more. Hamlet, the story of the Prince of Denmark. If you recall the basic plot, Hamlet's father was murdered by his uncle, Claudius, who then marries his mother, Gertrude. And at a certain point, Hamlet, who never truly accepted that story, encounters the ghost of his father. His father tells him everything that had happened, that he had been murdered by his own brother, and asks Hamlet to avenge him. He encounters his father's ghost in the shadows of the night, which then sets in motion an entire plot. A plot to expose his uncle, take revenge on him, and restore things to their rightful order. But there's a detail here that pushes Hamlet more toward tragedy than drama. Because Hamlet, in his pursuit of vengeance, not merely harmony or the restoration of universal order, ends up turning his story, through the loss of faith in the natural order of things, from a drama into a tragedy. For those who listened to that lecture about which I've often mentioned and consider one of the most important in recent times, specifically the last and second to last chapters of Tales of the Soul's Conquest of Evil, we discussed a very interesting and recurring theme, both in India and in Greek theater, the idea that the human being enters life and goes through a series of trials, often very harsh ones. And it is through overcoming these trials without losing faith in life, in the natural order, in what the Indians call dharma, that growth occurs. He restores that order at a much higher state of maturity. In other words, from one drama to the next, the human being grows until reaching the fulfillment of their role in nature. This is present both in Greek drama and in the sacred books of India. In other words, it is the same idea. Dharma, the human being's belief in the law of dharma. We'll see that Hamlet exchanges trust for vengeance. This leads, in the end, to everything being resolved in a tragedy. Almost all the characters, Dyaha, his uncle, his mother, everyone dies in the end. So, we'll see very strong traces of Hamlet in the story. You may recall Simba's encounter with his father, guided by Rafiki. The father, who appears to him in the midst of the clouds, tells him to reclaim his rightful place. Who tells him to take his place in the circle of life. So there are a number of elements, the reclaiming of Mufasa's kingdom, his uncle, a whole set of stories that well analyze. Very soon, in more depth. And from Bambi, of course, the child who is also deeply shaken by one of life's trials, which is the loss of his mother at a very young age. The figure of the father as the just leader, as the righteous king. The guidance of the child by the father, in other words, there are elements of Bambi there as well, present there too. What I would like you to understand is that all the success of The Lion King and the success it continues to have, from its original release to its 3D re-release, and now with all the anticipation surrounding this upcoming release, is not simply a coincidence, when a particular story has a very deep symbolic foundation. By touching that symbolic depth, it seems to strike some of the strings of life, the strings of the human heart, of the human being. The human being recognizes themselves in this historical journey, in these timeless narratives, which are the great themes of life. And it's as if a sense of nostalgia descends upon theme recognition of those threads, those essential strings that, through alienation and the pursuit of success, superficiality, has stopped those strings from resonating. So, we can take a moment to reflect on the cycle of life. The cycle of life, which is the first scene, that marvelous scene at the Stone of the Kingdom, where the cub is presented. And all the animals rejoicing in that moment, it is fundamentally a deep faith that the universe is cosmos, not chaos, that there is an order, that everything has its place, and when each thing is in its rightful place, there is no evil in the universe. For those who watched my lecture on the Celts, remember that at a certain moment, a druid responds to Alexander the Great. When Alexander asks him what the Celts feared, the druid replies that the Celts feared only two things, that the sky might fall upon the earth, or that the sea might rise from its bed toward the sky. If the sky remains in its place and the sea remains in its place, it is a sign that nature has not lost its order. It is enough for you to also take your rightful place, and everything will be as it should. Harmony continues. In other words, this deep trust that we perceive in these ancient traditions that nature is harmony, is cosmos and not chaos. That cycle of life presented at the beginning is a reaffirmation of this harmony, of the place of each thing, of the order that Plato regarded as the foundation of justice. In other words, the universe is in flux. The universe is cosmos. Now, within the order of life, challenges are part of it. At a certain point, there is disruption, difficulty, drama, because it is through overcoming these obstacles that all beings rise. And remember that evolution is the elevation of consciousness. Evolution is maturity. So, through overcoming the dramas of life, all beings are elevated. How does this drama present itself? At first, we have the just king, which is the ancient myth of the king of the world, which is nothing more than a symbolic image of the idea of God. The king of the world, under whose gaze all of creation lies, all of nature aligned with his laws. And he rules not only in his own name, but in alignment with all the just kings who came before him. Remember Mufasa saying this to Simba. In other words, there exists the law of Dharma, the arm of God extended over the cosmos. Everything is aligned, in harmony. But at a certain moment, this king of the world is overthrown, dethroned, killed. Then comes the story of the usurper. Notice that all these things are not only happening outside, they are also happening within us. What I find beautiful and meaningful in this film is that nature returns in its most pristine form. The characters are animals. Perhaps so that we can step away from the alienation we live in and feel this call from nature. That untouched nature also exists within us. This call from the King's Rock is meant for each of us to remind us of our connection to the laws of nature. So, at a certain point, it is natural for this cosmos to break apart in order to be rebuilt on a new level with greater maturity and deeper awareness from all its characters. In other words, the king of the world, the just king, the wise king, is established within us. We lost the story. We lost contact with wisdom. And usurper rises to the throne of our lives. The usurper is usually selfishness, with all its consequences: ignorance, sensuality, excessive desire, in other words, animality and violence that seize power. All of this was represented by Scar. Notice that he embodied all of that. Weakness, crude sensuality, instinct, violence, envy. He is the usurper. When a person goes through a moment of chaos, when they internalize that chaos, the usurper takes power within them. But within them, echoing, is the voice of the Father. That voice of the wise Father, the voice of wisdom, which from the depths of his unconscious never stops calling out to him, urging him to take his rightful place, to restore order. Because that is his responsibility, is what nature expects of him. All the kings who embodied the law of the world went through their trials, knew how to fight, and succeeded in restoring order. In other words, this deeper nature is higher nature, we could say. It is the call of his divine essence, which is the call of the Father within him. Notice that the voice of the Father comes from the heavens, that is, from the highest point of his consciousness, from his very essence. And this calling, no matter how much he tries to escape it, surrendering to a carefree Lithia life of amusement, surviving in this world with ease, diminishing or ignoring his power, this calling eventually reawakens. Whether through the voices of the past or through the voice of a master, Rafiki, who shows him that nothing and no one is truly gone. All those who contributed beyond form a great chain. And now it is his turn, just as he is. So, this call from the Father leads him to reclaim his place, his role as the protagonist. He goes forth and faces his challenges. He confronts all the shadows outside of him and within him as well. And he manages to triumph over all of it, and to reconcile all the forces that played a part in his survival. To reconcile all the masters he had along the way, and to once again reign over the lands of the kingdom, and once again attain harmony, to once again draw near to his true nature, to inherit his mission, his dharma, and to fulfill his role. In other words, notice that when we hear about these things, we are not merely admiring a children's cartoon. What we feel is nostalgia. I remind you again of that passage where Plato says that true beauty does not stir desire and use it stirs nostalgia. It seems that through it, we are able to remember something within us that is very pure, very powerful, very beautiful. A mission. We are able to remember the voice of the Father. We are able to recall the ancient myth of the just king, the king of the world, who awaits for us to take up our role. When we do this within ourselves, it brings harmony, it brings wisdom. When we do this outwardly, we become great leaders and are able to share, to distribute that harmony which exists within us with the outside world. I remind you once again, a story like this so deeply rooted in myths, in great dramas. A story like this makes us feel as though we are part of it. The call of the force of nature, the call of the cycle of life, the call of the king's stone. This call is also meant for us. And that is why, at times, without much awareness, because generally speaking, in today's world, we are so alienated, forgive me, from this symbolic calling of life you pursue it, thinking we are merely seeking entertainment. But deep down, we are following traces that lead us back to our own true nature. These symbolic elements embedded within are very powerful. And even if we don't fully understand them, they shake you as if only for a few moments they shake that superficial structure of mere survival to which we have surrendered. In other words, perhaps it is no longer the time for Hakuna Matata. Now is the time to listen to the voice of the Father. And the film brings this to a close in a very beautiful way. In other words, it is a drama, not a tragedy. Simba trusts she does not seek revenge. He seeks harmony. And he manages to reconcile all the elements in a restored kingdom, within himself, wisdom, outside himself, leadership, happiness, and well-being for all his people. We, too, need to reclaim that. Not revenge, but trust, faith in nature, including human nature. Reflect on this a bit the next time you watch another presentation of The Lion King. Take a moment to ask yourself, the things that move Miri, do they move me? Deep down, what part of you is stirred by something? What within you recognizes something? In The Lion King, this is not a myth, not merely a made-up story. This is the story of humanity, retold in a very beautiful, very simple, and very comprehensive way. But it is the story of humanity. There are very important mythic structures present there. That's it. I hope you enjoy it, but also take time to reflect. One does not exclude the other. In everything that moves us, there is learning. Remember that I'm here trying to encourage you to awaken the philosopher that lies dormant within you. And the philosopher loves entertainment, but also loves reflection. In fact, reflection is one of the finest forms of entertainment. Think about that. A warm embrace and enjoy the film.